So I'm going to get away from humans now and look at animals. Why is natural darkness so important to animals? Okay, so we probably all heard the term nocturnal, okay? Fewer people have heard the term crepuscular, which means active at dawn and at dusk. And of course, diurnal is what we are, okay? So nocturnal animals in particular have adapted, they are very finely adapted to lighting at night, no lighting at night, right? To the lighting levels that exist in the natural situation at light. Some amphibians in particular are adapted to light levels that would seem pitch black to us. They can see perfectly well in them. And when a car light goes by, they're blinded, can be blinded effectively for much longer than humans would be. And they're easy prey in that time until they recover. So there are many other ways that they are adapted to light levels. Their periods of activity are wired into certain light levels. The way they hunt is adapted to hunting in the dark, not hunting in light. Diurnal animals hunt in light. When we have light that leaks into the evening, the diurnal animals can hunt longer and they hunt better because they hunt with their eyes. And they've actually seen nocturnal animals shift. Some animals, wading birds, can hunt in different ways by feeling around or listening, not smelling because birds don't smell well, and or looking. And when there is artificial lighting, they shift to visual strategies and they catch more prey, okay? Which is great for them, not so good for the prey. Okay, so now other animals, it's not just a problem for nocturnal animals. Really, almost all animals interact with lighting levels in some way. And it is a health issue for them, and it triggers and regulates behavior, like emerging for a bat, coming out of the roost, getting active if you're a firefly. Many different animals are active at certain light levels and inactive at others. And they migrate in the fall, a combination of temperature and day length, okay? And birds sing in the morning when it hits the light level. Birds around me sing at 3:30 in the morning now, okay? Potentially not good. But some of it is definitely not good, okay? I would think the reason I say potentially not good, I don't know what the ramifications of them singing earlier are, but that is a thing connected to mating, okay? And so you start messing with that and it's likely to be a problem. So what does it actually do to animals? I touched on some of this already. Like humans, it actually affects the health of an individual organism. And of course, an individual organism eventually is part of a group of animals. So if a mother dies or, it has ripple effects beyond the organism, the individual. It alters these processes and behaviors that are dependent on day length and light intensity. And it makes some animals active at times when they should not be. And I'll talk a little bit about that. It enhances the vision of some animals, degrades the vision of others, and certain animals are attracted to light in fatal ways, and other animals, even within the same, some bats are attracted to light, some bats are repelled by light. So that is, I'll talk more about that too. And again, bluish white light is almost always a bigger problem than these lower wavelength lights, amber or red. An exception being fireflies, because the light they emit is close to amber, depending on the species. So a complication, but that's ecology. So how do these things play out? The timing and synchronization of processes that are triggered by day length and gets off. Things could migrate. They may delay it because they perceive that the day length is longer. And then if they delay their migration too long, there can be all sorts of bad aspects to that. They may run out of food in the place that they are before they migrate. I mentioned bats, okay? That's an example, I'll get to that. There is the idea that they're attracted or repelled by lights. And it affects habitat eventually. Some mice that they've studied actually will move out of lit areas. They won't hunt or they won't forage in lit areas, okay? So they have to go farther to find something to eat if their nest happens to be in an area that's lit. Every time they have to go farther, it's an energy expenditure that they don't need to make. I mentioned fireflies. I got a slide on that. So it affects reproductive success in some animals. It's interestingly, they've known for many, many years that lighting affects chickens. And they actually use it to regulate egg laying. They use, just an aside since I'm a horticulturist, they use light to manipulate Christmas cactuses and poinsettias. Poinsettias, really cool how they do that, but I don't have time. So, bats. Some bats, depends on the species, will only emerge from their roosting site, whether, in my case, it's my attic, until a certain level of darkness occurs outside around the entrance. And so if it's not dark enough outside, they will stay in the roost, okay? And if you think in the dawn, if the light levels are high, it gets light earlier, okay? And what that turns out to mean is they get some hunting time shaved off both ends of the night, okay? Less hunting time means less food. Less food means lower survival. Sea turtles are like the poster child for lighting impacts. How many people, just out of curiosity, have heard about sea turtles and lights being a problem? Okay, that's good. Certain species of sea turtles, including the ones in Florida, although there's several species in Florida, I think, the first thing they do when the mother lays eggs in the sand, they come up at night. There are hordes of predators around, okay? In order to survive, they have to get to the ocean as quickly as possible. If it's a moonless night, okay, the brightest thing is I just read today, it's actually the reflection of light off the waves. In any event, the seaward horizon is slightly brighter than the land under natural lighting conditions. So they go toward the brightest light, okay? And usually, in a natural situation, that gets them to the ocean as quickly as possible. With lighting, they go to the brightest light. Often it is back away from the beach, okay? They cross roads, they get run over. They actually, I just read today, walk into fires like campfires and get burned to death, and they get eaten by, they get disoriented, they wander around. Sooner or later, they die of starvation or they get eaten. I will say on a hopeful note, okay, they have actually, and it ties into the end of this talk, you can use certain colored lighting to help them so that they go to the ocean. And they've made good efforts. In fact, the last slide is one of those lights at my house. They have made good efforts to address this problem because there are no sea turtles that I'm aware of that have any lives to spare. Okay? So birds, I imagine most of you have heard that birds fly into buildings. Birds fly into buildings during the day. That is an issue of reflection off the glass. But they also fly into buildings and other structures at night. particularly if there is a steady burning light, okay? And it is a major cause of bird mortality, although there are several others, unfortunately, that are worse. But it's particularly a problem in cloudy or foggy conditions because they use, to a degree, they use celestial bodies to navigate. So they're attracted to light pretty much always, but they can maintain their navigation most of the time if they can see the stars. If they cannot, because it's foggy, they will get trapped by the light and start to circle it, and they cannot break away from it. And it can, in some cases, I read, because I was researching this book, before they started doing flashing lights on towers, they had, in some cases, 20 or 30,000 birds killed in one incident. So that's just one place, one night, 20 or 30,000 birds killed, okay? And it happens all out on BLM lands. That's who I'm doing this book, or who I wrote this book for. They have oil and gas facilities. They're lit at night, and if it's foggy, the birds come and just go round and round, and they eventually they collide with guy wires, they collide with the structure, they just drop of exhaustion, and they get eaten. So.
Can you talk about the World Trade Center?
Oh yeah, thank you. In one of the articles that Sherry put in the resources, there's two just outstanding articles on this topic in the list. So if you're interested, you should check that out. These two blue beams of light are from the 9/11 memorial in New York City. And when they turn those lights on, it immediately, within a few minutes, has attracted thousands and thousands of birds, which again, even though there's nothing for them to run into, and it's an important point about attraction to lights. It applies to everything that gets attracted by light. When it is attracted by light, it's not doing what it's supposed to do, okay? It's particularly bad for insects because that's the next slide, okay? So I'll get there, okay? But it's bad for birds too. And I think they estimated there could be up to 1 million birds attracted just to these lights if they left them on. So they worked with them now. I think it's on once a year for about 20 minutes. And they make sure not that it isn't during bird migration because, again, most birds are not active at night. It's really a problem for migrating, birds that migrate at night. Nocturnal birds, of course, are also suffering these kinds of effects from light pollution, not in migration, but a very common bird that was very common, at least when I was young, in Wilmette. I used to hang out at the Baha'i Temple a lot. They had very bright lights shining up on the temple, and you would see hundreds and hundreds of nighthawks, common nighthawks flying around. Not anymore. I know that the nighthawks have decreased in numbers. I suspect the real problem is that their food has decreased greatly in numbers. So moths, we all know, are attracted to lights. If any of you were camping as children and have been camping lately, you're not seeing anywhere near as many insects at the lights as you used to. If you drive across country, you're not seeing nearly as many insects on your windshield, okay? And that's because they are not there. They will fly directly at or around a light source, and they will not do anything else until that light is turned off. They don't mate, they don't eat. If they are eating, they don't all eat, but they don't mate, they don't do anything. They get burned up when they finally come to the light. They die of exhaustion, or if they do eat, they die of starvation. Other animals, spiders and they've done studies under streetlights, and they monitor the scavengers. And so they get huge numbers of spiders and other things come in to eat all of the corpses. So it's great for them. It's not good for the moths, okay? But having more spiders, having winners and losers isn't a zero-sum game. You actually don't want winners. You want things in balance, right? Because as soon as one population goes up, there isn't enough food. Okay, now I modified this from trillions to hundreds of billions die. No one really knows, except they know it's an astronomically huge number of insects that die by being attracted to lights. Not to mention pesticides, okay, and climate change and everything else. So fireflies, very interesting. They use, obviously, I assume we all know what bioluminescence is, right? They generate their own light, cold light, so they don't overheat, which took a long time for them to figure out how they did that. They use it to attract mates, but also, I found out, to repel enemies. Some of the larvae flash, they're toxic. And like venomous snakes are brightly colored sometimes, or monarchs, it's a warning to predators. There's one species where the females actually flash to fool the males of other species. And when they come to mate, they get eaten. One of the few carnivorous fireflies. So they have what's called niche partitioning, and a lot of animals do this. You have two animals of the same genus, okay, so they're related, but they're not the same species. And they're active at different times of day so that they are not competing for food, okay? And fireflies do this. Their flashing patterns are complex, and they need to stay out of competition with each other. If the light level is too high, you start getting overlap in it's not partitioned properly. They've observed this in geckos on houses and other species as well. I had no idea about any of this stuff when I started this work, and I have had a really interesting job. This was by far the most interesting thing I worked on in 30 years. So, not fireflies, this whole topic. Fireflies are pretty cool, though. It masks their signals, okay? And they actually have to flash more brightly to be seen by the other sex. And every time they flash, they're expending energy, okay? Because that energy doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from whatever fat they have stored or whatever their food supply is. Some of them don't eat as adults, okay? So in any event, that is a problem. I did want to say a word about plants. The effects on plants are less problematic, but not no problem at all for plants. It tends to be in closer proximity to lights. Many animals are affected by low levels of light at actually reasonably long distances. Plants much less so, but certain plant behaviors like setting buds in the case of the cactus, having the bracts turn red in the case of a poinsettia, many other plants actually have behavior, so to speak, that are tied into day length and affected by light. And it can affect their growth rates. And again, I don't know if it's through melatonin suppression, but it also affects their ability to recover from disease. So I have talked almost exclusively about the direct effects. Okay, when we do an environmental impact statement, you talk about direct effects and indirect effects. So I have a project, I have a stressor, an impact source, it directly affects something, and then you have to look at what are the ripple effects? What else is affected by this getting affected? So the effects of light pollution on insects are definitely significant, okay? And the direct effect on birds are significant. But most songbirds, and I will say also almost all of the mammals we have around here, I tried to think about that earlier today. I don't think beavers eat any insects. Deer, I don't think eat insects. Rabbits don't eat insects. Pretty much everything else eats insects, at least it's part of their diet. But for birds, when they're raising fledglings, the diet for a while at least is exclusively caterpillars for the most part, but other bugs as well. So anything that affects insects affects a lot of other living things, including plants, since the vast majority of plants are pollinated by insects, okay? And a lot of our food comes from those plants that are pollinated by insects. So if you want to eat grain cereals for the rest of the future, you don't need insects so much, but pretty much anything else sooner or later comes to insects. And I will say on a personal note, I'm actually more worried about the sharp decline in insects than I am worried about climate change overall. And I'm an opinion of one. I'm not sure many other people would say that, but I have studied food supply in kind of as a side thing. And the loss of insects is truly dire. I mean, you almost better hope that the results that they're finding aren't correct somehow. So, right. Guess I said enough on that.